Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear and everything is good for you right now. We have a challenging topic here about disrupting by leading. Disrupting means making significant change. For me, leading is about having the courage and taking the first step and being brave. And we have 20 minutes to cover this in. So it's going to be an interesting challenge. This is me. Very happy for you to reach out and connect on LinkedIn. I was CEO of Interbrand in London, Turkey, the Middle East, Scandinavia and India a while ago, and then became their chief marketing officer. I've also been CEO of a company called Big Fish that specialized in working with brands that are a force for good and startups. And these days I'm a consultant, a coach, and I also volunteer. I give 20% of my time to voluntary work, which I see as being important for me and how I progress. And I guess overall, I just try and be an authentic version of myself. So hopefully you'll forgive that authentic version of myself as we continue in the presentation. I'd like to borrow this story first off from David Foster Wallace. It's a parable, if you like. There's two fishes swimming in the ocean. There's an older fish that I've managed to depict with glasses and a beard, because I wear glasses and a beard. And there's a younger fish, and they swim past each other. And the older fish says to the younger fish, "How's the sea today?" And the younger fish says, "What sea?" And it's an interesting parable because it's talking about how, despite our intellect, despite how clever we become, we stop noticing the things that are going on around us. We focus on our own priorities, we focus on our own lives, and we stop seeing the surroundings that we're in, and we just focus on us and what's important to us. And I think that's an interesting backdrop to some of what we're going to talk about today. We know what's going on in the world around us. We can see it. We can see the terrible environmental disasters that are taking place, but still we have trouble doing things and creating action around us. There's an interesting quote here where we're talking about the projections of climate science have been pretty robust. Sadly, so is humanity's ability to spew out ever-increasing amounts of greenhouse gases. If we don't halt global warming soon, the extreme events that we've seen this year will pale into insignificance as to what's to come next year. So very clear warning signs, but we still seem to struggle to act around this. And our problems aren't caused because we're not clever enough, or we're not capable enough, or we can't do things. Our problems are caused because we are so clever, we're so capable, and we're so able to do things in this world. This is a quote from a guy called Gus Spieth that I think illuminates this further, because we tend to see the solution as being about science, but in fact, the solution is within all of us. So Gus sort of says that I used to think that the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. I think this is quite profound because marketeers in the audience today can respond to this sort of thing. We do know how to do spiritual and cultural transformation. It's the selfishness, the greed, the apathy that exists within humanity, which is what's actually got to change. This is Anne Frank. I'm sure most of you have probably heard of her. Anne Frank was a Jewish girl who lived in Amsterdam in the Second World War and famously hid herself from the Nazis and wrote a diary as she hid herself. The quote is sort of saying that the people who hid Anne Frank were the people who are breaking the law. The people who killed her were the people who are actually following the law. I think this is quite a hard-hitting way of looking at this, but if we look at our businesses and their role within environments and society, we can see that businesses typically want to grow all of the time. We've just seen Modi in India at the G20 summit say that environmental concerns can't come in front of business growth. And this is really quite concerning because we accept our business objectives, even if that's actually damaging the environment. And we can accept our business objectives because it's our job, we're providing for our families, we're providing for our kids. But if we actually step back from that and recognize that the objectives of the business that we're working for are actually destroying the environment for our families and our kids, we start to think slightly differently about what's going on around us. So I think this quote about Anne Frank is quite prophetic. If we just accept our business objectives and we accept that our business needs to grow and we regard that as being our first priority, then we stop asking the questions that we need to ask inside our businesses to create the right level of change for what comes next. Or we want to look at it another way. This neat cartoon puts it there. Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment, we created lots of shareholder value. And it really becomes quite illuminating if businesses are quite happy to go on producing stuff and have people buying more and more and more. But the net effect is that, in fact, they're destroying the markets that they're going to face for the future. So it is, very profound in terms of the changes that we need to see that we make. And as a first step, we have to realize how foolish we've actually been. Then we have to stop accepting the situation, stop being so selfish, and stop being so greedy. It's time that we take a long, hard look at ourselves. And as we peel this back, it requires a fundamental change in how we view the world. If you like, we have seen leaders in front of us, and we look at those leaders as being role models. And our leaders are people who've benefited from the economic system that's in place. And we look at our leaders and we see the materials that they've got and the lifestyle that they've got, and we want to emulate that. We want to provide it for our families. But the more that we keep trying to do that, the more we're actually consuming and the more difficult we're making the issues for ourselves. And we're passing this problem on constantly for the next generation if consumerism and material wealth are viewed in the same ways that they are today. So we have to take a long, hard look at ourselves, and that means we have to take a long, hard look at the businesses that we're working for and we're contributing to. As the quote says, the only thing that's necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. This is another quote from Gus Spieth, who talks about the full costs of consumption beyond market prices are hard to determine, they're hard to see. Typically, we underestimate the full cost of consumption. The benefits of consumption, meanwhile, are immediate, they're tangible. And we typically overestimate the benefits of consumption, partly because we've got this huge marketing apparatus that sits around us reporting on the success, in inverted commas, of businesses and what businesses are achieving through their sales, through their growth. But it's this sense of asymmetry which is contributing to our overall sense of consumption. We live like we're the last generation on Earth. We live like we're not looking at passing this planet on to the next generation and the generations after that. We seem happy to accept this consumption that's going on around us. There are lots of new ways of thinking about economic growth and how businesses should be living within this particular challenge. So I think for me, I accept this piece of capitalism feels like it's actually eating itself. One book in this area talks about this concept of donut economics. If you look at the ring, what it's trying to say is that we shouldn't be overshooting the ecological ceiling so that our businesses are damaging the environment. At the same time, we shouldn't let our businesses become so dominant that they create a shortfall in the social foundations of what everyone can have and provide. So we need businesses to thrive in this safe space where they're being regenerative, so they're not taking stuff out of the economy, and at the same time, they're being distributive of the type of economic growth that they're providing. And it's a fundamental rebalancing of how we perceive business success and what it is that we're looking for businesses to do. But if businesses continue to grow, then that's just continuing to squeeze the opportunity for other businesses to create their own degrees of success and provide for their own audiences and their own people. And it's this sense of triumph, this sense of growth being the never-ending mantra of success, which is potentially most dangerous for our businesses as we go forwards. Changing a business is going to feel hard. But actually, if we look at our role within that business, try and see every business as being like a community. And if a business is like a community, it's got a culture. And we know businesses have got cultures. And we know that actually we are part of that culture as well. If we accept that our business has got a culture, we know that we can change that business. We can be the seed of change within that business. And as we know, the best way to deliver change is to be the change that you want to see yourself. It means we stop being so accepting, we stop being apathetic, and we start to actually change our businesses so that they're contributing to the success that we need to see. We might not be scientists, but if we're marketeers, if we're business people, we can help create that spiritual and cultural transformation that businesses need. Selfishness, greed, apathy are all within our personal control. We can be less selfish, we can be less greedy, we can be less apathetic and less accepting of the change that we can see. It's our personal influence that can create those seeds of change. It's our business influence that can create a ripple effect that actually change businesses around us. And we have to embrace opportunities for protest, because it's protest that actually changes things. Otherwise, the world is able to just carry on in the way that it's carried on before. If we don't become activists around this, then nothing will actually change. And we're not taking our responsibilities seriously enough, because we're sitting back and we're letting this disaster unfold around us. And our generation as business leaders are the people who've been the beneficiaries of the damage that's been created. If we're the beneficiaries of this damage, it's our responsibility to fix it. It's time for us to go against our human nature, against our desires to consume, to actually take less and give back more. And it's only by demonstrating through example, not opinion, that we'll be able to create the changes that we need for future generations. As we begin to wrap up, you can see that things are only going to get worse. Sir David Attenborough, the environmentalist, talks about this age being the new extinction. We're halfway through this new extinction. We're in terrible, terrible trouble. The longer we wait to do something about it, the worse it's going to get. And it might be we're working for businesses where we can see that we are already doing the most that we think that we can do for the environment. But the reality is that when we look at the world around us, collectively, we're not doing enough. So even if we think our business is A grade and performing to the best level, we've still got to go further, because the changes aren't taking place quickly enough across society. We have to look for more that we can do and spread that influence through the demonstration of what we're doing to actually help that create that change for others. So how do we go about doing it? Well, it's like any process of change inside a business, but it's more fundamental and it's more important. So up the top of this flow diagram, we're looking at obliterating the sense of complacency that can exist. Lighting that touch paper, making sure that the need for change is completely understood inside the business. So that word obliterate is a very dynamic way of talking about disruption. Once we got rid of the sense of complacency, we start to clear the ways that we can see what is it that we need to do. Where can we think we can have the greatest effect about the change that we need to make in our business so that it becomes more sustainable for a global future? Then we're setting an ambition so we can turn that into something that the business aims to achieve and something that the people inside the business can rally behind. Then it's about creating actions. Then it's about measuring how far we've got to within those actions to then go round the circle again. Because this is not a one-off program. This is not an initiative. This has to be a continuous cycle that once we've got to a point inside our business where we feel that we've achieved an objective, what's the next thing we can do? What's the next thing we can do? What's the next thing we can do? Because this is not a problem that's going to go away. And every time we understand better what it is that technology can enable us to do to make ourselves a better business and a more sustainable business, we've got to embrace that. There is no sense of putting down the tools and thinking, okay, guys, we've cracked it. It's a constant process of continuous improvement. And as we start to think about it, how do we start to look for the changes that we're looking for? And interestingly, looking back can actually help us quite a lot. If we go back in time, we can see that actually the world wasn't in the troubles that it's in at the moment if we go far enough back. So what influence can we take from the way that we used to do things that could enable us to have a better environment at the moment? So this is where this whole sort of sense of thinking local to act globally comes in. How do we consume produce that's created more locally to us? How do we make sure that we're consuming what's seasonal as opposed to having vegetables and fruits transported around the world? We need to think about how we're being inclusive, never exclusive. So by being inclusive, we're thinking about everybody, not just our own micro communities. We need to be thinking long-term and short-term at the same time. So what are our longer-term ambitions and what is it we could be doing tomorrow to make a difference? We have to have relentless energy around this topic because there's no day off when we're focusing on this. We have to be brave inside our organizations and have the courage to call out inadequacy, to recognize that we've got a voice and that voice can create change. It might not make us popular, it might make us disruptive, but actually we're talking about something which is much more fundamental than our own career. We're talking about trying to change and save the world. So we've got to focus on what's truly important. And by doing that, we've got to avoid delusional rhetoric, where you can see businesses are always really keen to engage in hyperbole and rhetoric to congratulate themselves on the great job that they're doing. But the reality is that the world is still sitting out there suffering. So whatever great job we think we're doing at the moment, we are not doing enough. And if we still can't create the change we're looking for, think of your grandchildren, think of the generation beyond. There was an interesting quote from one of the climate activists in the UK recently after he was arrested for protesting, where he said, actually, all I want to be able to do is look my grandchildren in the eye and say, I did everything I could. How many of us as business people feel that we could look our grandchildren in the eye and say that we've done everything that we could possibly do? And lastly, on a lighter note, there's a great quote from Orson Welles, which I started using in 2007 when we had the economic problems then. And I still continue to look at it to this day because every time things seem to feel like they're getting worse, I come back to this quote where he says, in Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, they had terror, they had murder, they had bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace. What did that produce? The cuckoo clock. So this is a handy metaphor for saying, okay, we're going through turbulent times, we're going through difficult times, but actually this is where humanity comes at its most creative, this is where we can make the biggest difference. This is our opportunity to do things differently and to invent the way that the world should actually be. So as I close, this is just some influence and thanks that I would give to some of the reading that I've done to produce this. And I would encourage you to take a look at any of this that feels useful to you. And I thank you for your time this morning. If you would like to reach out, please do so. I'm happily on LinkedIn. You can find me as Graham Hales, or reach out on any other form of contact. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good conference.